So that kind of leads into our next little section here about organizing and what do we do to actually get the green vision. We talked about the green key values, and we gave kind of an overview of the Green New Deal and our platform. We gave a little history of the party and talked about how we're activists and campaigners, essentially. So, how does all of that mix together in order to actually build a green movement? And this is, of course, a very deep subject on its own, still open to a lot of debate and strategy discussions and things like that. And we'll get more into that in our eco-socialism and organizing 101s in the next couple of months. But, we can make some comments real quick here. So one of the things that you might want to look into if you really want to get a sense of what the Green Party strategy is to win, so to speak, to grow a movement and to win the things we want, is a great book written by Howie Hawkins, The Case for an Independent Left Party from the Bottom Up. And it's very short, and you can get a free ebook online. It's very short, but it's a really good read, and it goes very quickly through some U.S. history about how important independent left movements were to winning so many of the the rights and the things that we have today, including 40-hour work week and things like that. It was all independent worker unions and independent parties that were advocating these things. It was not the two major parties that did it. They only begrudgingly did it after the people showed up in the room with 100 people, like Chris is talking about. They only respond when we build independent movements, and they prefer us to not build independent movements, because if they could trap us in the Democratic Party, for example, they could trap us in bureaucracy and all these things and weaken our power and weaken our voice and drown us out in all of their corporate dollars. And, the only way to actually have our voice and to not get lost in the sauce, I like Howie's quote there, is to be this independent party that is advocating our own policy on our own ballot line, taking our own actions, bringing our own people to the council meeting and all this stuff. That's how it has to be. So our organizing strategy is again, kind of that mixture that we have to take an activist approach, which includes political education, which this series is part of it. And we also have to run our own candidates on our own ballot lines with our own party platform to make sure that we're visible, to make sure that our ideas are visible, our ideas are heard. People have the ability to express their support for those ideas, to learn more about those ideas, and that we're not lost in the sauce, is how he says. So, I have a couple of tactics here, right, that we talked about that Greens should support organizing workplaces and unions. Chris mentioned, sign your union card. The Green Party should essentially be the political arm of a lot of these unions. And unfortunately, a lot of unions get captured by the Democratic Party, which means the workers that are in that union, their concerns and their goals and all are, again, lost in the sauce because they get lost in the whole bureaucratic structure. So really, go ahead.
We had somebody running for county board in Southern Illinois, was a member of the union, right, of the AFSCME union. The Democrats were the ones that were attacking their pensions, right? And through the mechanizations of how corporate unions work, they ended up, the union ended up endorsing the Democrat, not the Green, even though the Democrat was the one on the board actively saying we need to reduce their pensions, we need to, and attacking the workers, whereas the Green was, a member of said union. And so, they didn't do it. And then another kind of localized example that I'll give is, the corporate unions, I often call them collaborationist unions when it comes to our large, massive unions like AFSCME, who have kind of forgotten that they're there to fight against capital, right? It's not just all about a cola. And my brother-in-law recently asked me to help him organize his food service industry job. And I reached out to some of the local unions in town, and the president of the former president of my local trades and labor association. And what I found out was that in a state capital of Springfield, Illinois, there is not one single established union that is making any effort to organize the service industry. the most oppressed workers that we have, some of the most oppressed workers that we have, right? None of the major unions are making any effort to do it, right? So there's a vacuum there. There's a void that we can help fill. And the good news is that our bottom-up independent philosophy ties very well into the bottom-up independent philosophy of the Wobblies, right?
Mhm.
We've got a natural partner there to work on organizing, what we called during the pandemic essential workers, who are actually sacrificial workers. But we need to, that's an opening for us there.
Yeah. So, one way that we should organize and be activists is to also support those local unions. Especially if you're one of those workers in one of those industries, join a union and then talk to them about how they need to support independent politics. On top of that, we can support mutual aid efforts at our local levels. So that's not just running a food bank or something, but I think it's a broader concept of teaching people skills and sharing political education and things like that. Creating all of that is vital to creating a strong movement. We of course support campaigns, especially at the municipal level, where we can and will win, right? Like we want to have more and more and more municipal campaigns running every year to serve as a base and a foundation for us to go for bigger things. And until then, we can utilize these state and national campaigns to maintain ballot access for our local candidates in some states, but also just to, in general, increase our visibility and to get our message out into the public. Again, we were talking about how the Green New Deal started with the Green Party, and having Howie Hawkins run and then Jill Stein run for president on the Green New Deal, in all those years got so much attention, especially in New York on the Green New Deal, that when new folks started to come in, like AOC, they felt compelled to adopt that because it was already in the public discussion, right? They felt like they'd be left out if they weren't talking about that. So running candidates and talking about it is an important aspect of putting pressure on the system and changing it.
And when you look at the New York in particular, the success that the Greens had in 2014, I think it might be 2010, but I'm almost positive it was 2014 when they got over 5%. Right when that happened, Andrew Cuomo, who was totally against the that election, he wanted a landslide, and he didn't get it, and partially he didn't get it because the Greens were over 5%, and that caused him to shift. They got a $15 minimum wage passed. They got a fracking ban passed. Right? There's pictures of Howie, who was the who was the gubernatorial candidate there in 2010, 2014, 2018, and now again in 2022. There's pictures of him being arrested at fracking protests, right, during that time period. And so the success that the Green Party saw actually did cause a shift from one of the staunchest, most corporate Democrats you could think of in Andrew Cuomo, right? It caused them to change their policies. And then what did they do in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic? They stuck a ballot access repression law into other bills, and they were able to triple what was needed for the Greens to even get on the ballot, right? So you see, Greens saw a surge. It caused a leftward shift in the Democratic Party, and we got policies that we had been advocating for passed, and then they almost immediately doubled down on the repression, right? As soon as they had the opportunity to sneak it through and make it harder for Greens to even get on the ballot, let alone compete, they did it. So these campaigns can have successes even if they don't win.
Yeah, and so there's another book that was edited by Howie, Independent Politics, that goes and talks about some of the history in the Green Party, of the big debate about when and where should you run campaigns and what is it useful for. So that could be an interesting thing for you to read too if you're more interested. But I think a summary of the debate and all was that folks ask about why would you want to run a presidential candidate, and especially the Democrats really harp on the whole spoiler thing, right? But it turns out that when Greens don't try to seriously run a candidate, the movement suffers. When Greens do run a candidate in every state, and they challenge Republicans and Democrats in every state, that's when we see a surge of support, because that is, I think, what independents want to see. That's what the alienated voters want to see. They want to see candidates in a party that's willing to challenge the status quo and to really change it. And so we have evidence of that. And we can't let the Democrats bully us around and push us around and say, all the things that they say. We have a right to be on the ballot, especially if we want to proclaim that we're a democracy. We have a right to get our issues out. Even when we don't win the office, we have a huge impact on the public debate, as Chris was talking about. So it's very important and we also get ballot access down ballot in many states by running state and national candidates. So it's really important for us to keep running those candidates and running good campaigns. And of course, strategizing. There we go. A little bit, about what our campaign message wants to be and things like that, obviously. But we need to keep running our candidates on our own independent ballot line in tandem again with all that activism to keep pushing our message and to keep pushing it. And even though they react with more suppression, to me, there's two takeaways from that. That one, they wouldn't do that unless they were threatened. So we're making an impact. Don't let them confuse you about that. We're making an impact, and that's why they're reacting. But second, whatever they do, we can overcome that by organizing. And the ballot access requirements are bigger now in some states, but they can be overcome with people power, with volunteering, with organizing. So the fact that they're reacting like that is actually the sign that we need to also, they double down on suppression. We need to double down on organizing, because it means we're having an impact, and we need to just keep going and keep pushing and keep building our movement.
There's a famous Emma Goldman quote: "If voting changed anything, they'd make it illegal."
Right.
It's often touted as an anti-voting sentiment.
Yeah.
But it's, in my opinion, far more prophetic, right? Anytime that voting does threaten to change things, we see repression follow, right? You can look at, the story I just told about New York. You can look at post-Civil War and the Reconstruction, right? You saw right after the Civil War, you saw, a comparatively large number of, black legislators elected. And then very quickly, the white establishment responded with poll taxes, with Jim Crow, but every time in this country we've seen independent voting actually start to make a change, the powers that be very quickly go and try to disrupt democracy as best they can. And it's because we're doing something right. We're making some moves, or we're making some changes.
Yep, for sure. So, I think the takeaway from all this is that it's very important that we maintain our independence from not just the political duopoly, not just Republicans and Democrats, but independence from capital, independence from, the money, right? The corporations. So we have to be our own self-funded, worker-owned and organized movement. And that's what puts pressure, and that's what wins change. And no one ever said change would be easy. But at the same time, it's necessary. And at the same time, we have wins to show that we're moving in the right direction, and we have to keep it up.
And making sure that we're independent of capital, right? That we're a bottom-up, self-driven, party and organization. It's not a guarantee, but it provides a pretty good buffer from the influence and the bribery that happens in mainstream politics, right?
Yes.
If you haven't been given $1 million, over the course of your career by the oil and gas industry, you're probably going to be a lot more open, or a lot less susceptible to being influenced into voting against ecological, regulation and things like that.
Yeah, that's why we insist on not taking corporate donations. We're grassroots, volunteer-run party that relies on small donations, and a lot of state parties are dues-paying memberships. so that they are working class movements funded by the workers themselves. That we don't take the money from the big capital and big business and all that stuff. So that it's very important to keep that independence. But aside from that independence, we have to keep up multiple tactics. All the run campaigns, but also run actions and marches and political education, all this stuff. We need kind of all of it together to really get us to the point where we can win larger victories. So, to kind of revisit, we're not only an activist organization, electoral party, but we're in some sense a multi-tendency party. That we are eco-socialist, but we don't necessarily prescribe one thing or the other. We don't say, let's go all in on electoral, let's go all in on action, let's go all in mutual aid. No, we need to have all of it. We need to have all of it working together cooperatively to really build the movement. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Drew Mason wanted to know, does the Green Party accept contributions from unions? The party, no. I can't think of any time I've known the party to accept union donations. Candidates, absolutely. Right, and this is where we get into kind of gray areas with language about PACs. Traditionally, most PACs are massive money laundering operations, meant to undermine our elections. But unions also run PACs. Community groups also run PACs. I know in 2020, the Hawkins Walker campaign accepted a PAC donation from Solidarity US. Solidarity is a socialist feminist organization that endorsed Howie, right? But in order for them to donate money to a political campaign, they have a PAC, right? And so, yes, we absolutely, I think, would accept money contributions from unions. I think we would love to see more contributions from unions. The problem we tend to get into, and you can kind of get away from this in your local elections. I know I told a story earlier where we didn't get away from it, and they, backed the institutional Democrat that was attacking them. But in your local elections, I think you're more likely to be able to convince especially since a lot of local elections are nonpartisan technically. Everybody knows who's who, but there's no party name on the ballot. I think you're way more likely to get unions to cross over, to turn away from the Democrats and to support Greens. When you get into the national level, even the most radical of the major unions are staunchly in the pocket of the Democrats. The AFL-CIO every few years writes an open letter about how they need more parties and they need to abandon the Democrats, but they've never once made a move to do it, right? They've never once made any real move to do it. And I can say during the Hawkins Walker campaign, we reached, when those letters come out, and I was a Green Party steering committee co-chair at one point when one of those AFL-CIO letters out, and we sent a letter immediately, like, you want to drop the Democrats? Let's have a conversation. There was no response. Yeah. It wasn't a real open letter with real ideas. It was pandering to their base, to their membership, who aren't actually supported by the Democrats, whose issues aren't supported by the Democrats. It was a head fake from leadership trying to get the grassroots membership off their ass. So, we would definitely accept union contributions. We definitely have. Like many of these situations, the issue isn't the Green Party being partisan. The issue is these other organizations being partisan. The issue is that the AFL-CIO is, not an independent organization. It's a Democratic Party front. The same for groups like SEIU. National Nurses United might be one of the few that might break, right? But I haven't done it yet. So I think it's important to understand that Greens are multi-tendency, as it says on the screen. We're willing to work on anybody on their issues, or work with anybody on their issues. The problem is they're not willing to work with us because we're outside of the power structure that they have aligned themselves with and tethered themselves to. This question comes up about the Movement for the People's Party a lot too, right? Why doesn't the Green Party work with the Movement for the People's Party? Because MPP doesn't want to work with us.
Uh-huh.
We reached out during the presidential campaign. We had meetings during the presidential campaign, and they said, nope, we're backing Biden. We're not Democrats, but we're backing Biden, but because they're Democrats, right? It's never been an independent party. So most of the time, it's not the Greens that are playing partisan games; it's the other side.
Yeah,
Um,
true. I think I want to add in there too that when it comes to unions and all, the campaign finance rules are complex, and so any group of people can form a PAC technically. Like you spend like $200 and you file a form and you're a PAC. And so that doesn't necessarily make you immediately bad or evil, right? Because you're just a couple of citizens trying to engage in politics. So I think we have the spirit in the Green Party of being funded by individuals, by being funded by the workers, the working class. So when it comes to something like a union, if the union money is all from workers, all from individuals, there's nothing wrong with that. If that union though took money from some corporate PAC, though, some dark money thing or whatever, then we would not take that at all, because that is what we are opposed to. It's that dark money from corporations being funneled to politicians to influence them. We don't do that. So it depends on the source, right? And so we will work with individuals and organizations that support our values and our goals of getting away from that corporate dark money. And we will work with them, but oftentimes, sadly, those organizations don't always want to work with us because they're so tied to the Democratic Party. But hopefully that's beginning to shift and change, because they're seeing how much the Democrats have really just failed, especially under Biden these last couple of years. Like every promise he made, like he basically gave up on, right? So maybe there's an opportunity here to work more with others. We love working with others. It's more a question of will they be willing to work with us.
Yeah, and Andrew Hager asks, how about independent party members? Does the Green Party accept contributions from them? When it comes to individual donations, I mean, I bet if we went through presidential campaigns and actually found out what party people belong to, we'd find out that we get a lot of money from the left flank of the Democratic Party, right? Or people who are still registered Democrats but are supporting the Green on a presidential or gubernatorial ticket. And then the opposite, right? People are supporting a Green at the local level and donating. And then voting other parties elsewhere. When it comes to independent, that depends state to state, right? In places like Illinois, where I live, there's no such thing as party registration. No one's a Republican or Democrat. We have a semi-open primary. You walk into the room, you say, I want this party's ballot, and they give it to you. There's no party registration. Or you go like I did last month, and you walk in and you say, I would like a nonpartisan ballot, and they tell you there are none, and you can't vote. And then they try to pressure you into picking Republican or Democrat, which is literally what happened to me when I went to vote in our primary. And then once I said no, I had a good discussion with the poll workers about how absolutely messed up our electoral system is. So when it comes to individuals, we take money from anyone. I will say there is often a level of vetting. I have definitely known multiple campaigns, including, I believe, Howie's campaign, that returned money to people we didn't want money from. Mm-hmm. When Jill Stein did her recount in 2016, I was on the steering committee, and Jill Stein's campaign came to the steering committee and said, we've been approached by lawyers about an election integrity lawsuit. We would like the Green Party of the United States to act as a fiscal agent and basically take donations for us. The reason for that is, as a political party, the Green Party of the United States can accept up to $100,000 in donations, and a political campaign can only accept, in that year it was $2,700. Now I think it's up to $2,800, right? So we could take a lot more money. We had something like 3 days before they had to spend the money, and we were told that we could vet the donors, but they couldn't give us the information before we made a decision. So the steering committee of the Green Party of the United States actually voted not to act as a fiscal agent, because we said, if there's $100,000 coming in, we need to know who it's coming from. We need to know who they are. We need to know why they're donating to us. We need to do serious vetting before we take that money. And the reality was, the money was coming from Democrats who wanted the election flipped, right? And so because of our values as a party, we said no. And Jill was able to raise, over $7 million, I think, on small scale donations. She didn't need the $100,000 that the lawyers came, that the lawyers came to her with, or the millions probably in large donations that the lawyers came to her with. And that decision was made because we didn't believe we would have the time and the resources to effectively vet the money and be sure that we weren't taking, quote unquote, dirty money as part of the recount. So yeah, we definitely do, but there is still some level of vetting and stuff going on. Like if we're on there and we see, I'm trying to think, if Ted Nugent donates to us, we're probably return that money, right? If Trump donates to us because he wants to hurt the Democrats, we're gonna return that money, right? As soon as we find out who it's from, we'll send it back. So yeah.
Yep. So
And then Drew Mason said, I liked the coalition with Peace and Freedom Party in the primary in California. Yeah, and we did the same thing in 2020 with our election. The Hawkins Walker campaign was nominated or endorsed by the Green Party of the U.S., Socialist Party, Socialist Alternative, Legal Marijuana Now Party of Minnesota, the Independent Socialist Group, Workers' Liberty, Student Loan Justice, and then a few DSA chapters that broke with the National Party. They're not a party, that broke with the national organization and endorsed them. And from what I heard, got in quite a bit of trouble. Like they DSA came down on them for endorsing an independent candidate instead of either staying out of it officially like DSA National did, or endorsing Biden, which de facto is what DSA did. So yeah, left unity is super important. I'm a big advocate for multiplicity of tactics. If we took every single left party in the United States and combined them in the presidential election, we'd be at like 2% of the vote, right? So none of us have figured out all the answers. None of us have a solid tactical solution moving forward into a mass party, and so we should be practicing radical solidarity, where we support each other, where we collaborate. We don't need to, and the trick in the United States is people are like, we need a big a leftist coalition party. Well, ballot access makes that very hard. It basically means a complete reset. If we form a U.S. Syriza, it means we have 51 ballot lines that we now have to go out and get, whereas the United States, whereas the Green Party right now is sitting at, over half the states we already have ballot access in. So, in that way, I think a good way to look at this, depending on where we are, is, that leftist coalition see the Green Party and dual membership as a way, as an electoral avenue for their movement and, their activist goals.
Mm-hmm.